It started quietly, so quietly that I might not have noticed if our lives hadn't been so predictable. Olivia's midnight calls seemed like nothing at first. A soft vibration, the glow of her phone casting faint light across our bedroom. She'd slip out of bed, the door closing behind her with careful quiet. I told myself it was just work. We had 2 children. Anna, our spirited 6-year-old with a laugh that could brighten any room, and Theo, just 3, who idolized his big sister. Olivia and I were a team, juggling the chaos of raising a family while keeping our marriage intact. Or at least that's what I thought. At first, I barely registered her late-night whispers from the hallway. "Hey," she said softly during one call, her voice warm and conspiratorial. I assumed it was an overseas client. Her job often required odd hours. But then there was the laughter, light, almost flirtatious. It was a few days later when I first heard the name. I had woken to the sound of Theo crying. He'd had a nightmare and wanted his mom. Bleary-eyed, I padded down the hallway, pausing when I heard her voice. "Jonathan, you're terrible," she said with a quiet giggle. I stopped in my tracks. "Jonathan?" Her voice was low and intimate in a way that made my stomach knot. I froze there, Theo's soft sniffles grounding me in the moment. Slowly, I turned and went back to his room, picking him up and holding him close until he drifted back to sleep. But I couldn't shake the unease that had taken root in my chest. When Olivia returned to bed, I pretended to be asleep, my breaths deep and even. But the air felt heavy, and the warmth of her beside me brought no comfort. The next morning, the usual chaos unfolded. Anna refused to wear anything but her favorite glittery sneakers, and Theo managed to get syrup in his hair before I'd even finished my first coffee. Olivia flitted through the kitchen, packing lunches and braiding Anna's hair like nothing was wrong. "Who's Jonathan?" I asked casually as she handed me a thermos. She hesitated just long enough for me to notice. "A consultant from work," she said, smiling. "We've been working on some tight deadlines, so we've had a few late-night calls." Her tone was breezy, almost too breezy. "That's it," I pressed, trying to keep my voice neutral. She looked at me then, her brow furrowing slightly. "Of course. What else would it be?" Anna tugged at my sleeve, interrupting the moment. "Daddy, can you tie my shoes?" I nodded, crouching down to help her, but my mind was elsewhere. Olivia had answered my question, but something about her tone didn't sit right. Over the next few weeks, the late-night calls continued. I'd wake to the faint hum of her voice, the door creaking open as she slipped out of our bedroom. Once, I caught a glimpse of her in the hallway, her back turned as she leaned against the wall, her phone pressed to her ear. I wanted to believe it was just work. I wanted to trust her, but doubt had taken root, and it grew with every passing day. It wasn't just the calls. Olivia's behavior shifted in subtle ways. She became more guarded with her phone, keeping it close even when she wasn't using it. She'd glance at the screen and smile at messages she wouldn't let me see. Even the kids seemed to notice something was off. Anna, ever perceptive, asked me one evening, "Why is Mommy always busy?" "She's working hard," I said, forcing a smile. "You know how important her job is. But she doesn't play with us like she used to," Anna said, her voice small. Theo chimed in, holding up his favorite stuffed dinosaur. "Mommy didn't see my dino show." My heart ached at their words. Olivia had always been so present, so involved. But now it felt like she was drifting away, not just from me, but from all of us. The tipping point came one Saturday morning. I was making pancakes. Theo perched on the counter beside me while Anna colored at the kitchen table. Olivia's phone buzzed on the counter, and without thinking, I glanced at the screen. A message popped up from someone labeled simply J. "Thinking of you. Can't wait to see you again." My stomach dropped. Theo tugged on my sleeve, oblivious to the storm brewing in my mind. "More pancakes, Daddy." I forced a smile, flipping another onto his plate. But the moment Olivia walked into the kitchen, I couldn't look at her the same. "Your phone's buzzing," I said, trying to sound casual. She picked it up, her expression carefully neutral as she glanced at the message. "Just work stuff," she said, slipping it into her pocket. but her hands trembled ever so slightly. And that was when I knew whatever was happening wasn't just in my head. The message haunted me. Thinking of you. Can't wait to see you again. Those words weren't the kind of thing you'd send to a colleague. They were intimate, personal. Something meant for someone who held a place in your heart. Someone who shouldn't exist when you were married with 2 kids. But I didn't confront Olivia. Not yet. I told myself I needed more proof, something irrefutable. So, I waited and watched, each passing day stretching the space between us like an invisible thread ready to snap. The children felt it too. Anna, who had always been Olivia's little shadow, started clinging to me more. She'd curl up next to me on the couch during movie nights, her head resting on my shoulder, while Olivia sat on the other side of the room, glued to her phone. Theo, too young to understand the shift, became more demanding. He'd tug at Olivia's sleeve, asking her to read him a story or watch him build towers with his blocks, but she'd brush him off with a distracted, "Maybe later, sweetheart." Later never came. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I decided to push her. We were sitting in the living room, the air between us thick with unspoken words. "Liv," I started, my voice quieter than I intended. "Who's Jonathan, really?" Her head snapped up, her expression a mixture of surprise and something else. "Guilt, maybe." "I told you," she said, her tone defensive. "He's a consultant. We've been working on a project together." "And the message on your phone? The one that said he couldn't wait to see you again? Is that part of the project too?" Her cheeks flushed, and for a moment I thought she might come clean. But instead, she crossed her arms and looked away. "You're reading too much into this, David. It's nothing." "It doesn't feel like nothing," I said, my voice cracking. "You've been distant for weeks. The late-night calls, the texts you hide from me. It's like you're not even here anymore." She sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Do you even hear yourself? You're accusing me of—" "What? Having an affair? You really think I'd do that to you? To our family?" "I don't know what to think," I admitted. "But I know something's wrong, and you won't tell me what it is." Her eyes softened then, and for a moment, I thought I saw the woman I had fallen in love with. "I'm just stressed, David. Work's been a lot, and maybe I haven't been as present as I should be. But you need to trust me. Please." Her words sounded sincere, but they didn't erase the doubt gnawing at my gut. The next few days were tense but quiet. Olivia made an effort to be more attentive, helping Anna with her homework, reading Theo his bedtime stories. It felt like she was trying to prove something, but her actions only made me more suspicious. It was too calculated, too deliberate. And then came the trip. My job occasionally required me to travel for a few days at a time, and this was one of those weeks. Normally, Olivia would fuss over my packing, slipping notes into my suitcase for me to find later. But this time, she barely looked up from her phone as I zipped up my bag. "Daddy, do you have to go?" Anna asked, her big brown eyes staring up at me. "I'll only be gone for a couple of days," I said, crouching down to hug her. "Be good for Mommy, okay?" Theo ran over, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. "Take Dino with you," he declared, thrusting it into my hands. I chuckled, ruffling his hair. "Dino's staying here to protect you and Anna." Olivia finally looked up as I stood. "Drive safe," she said, her smile faint. I kissed her on the cheek, but she turned away too quickly, and my lips brushed her hair instead. The trip didn't last long. Just 2 days before it was abruptly canceled. As I drove home, I debated whether to call Olivia and let her know I was coming back early, but something stopped me. I wanted to surprise her, to catch her in a moment of honesty, unscripted and raw. I pulled into the driveway, noting the unfamiliar car parked outside. A sleek black sedan that definitely wasn't hers. My chest tightened as I stepped out of the car, the keys in my hand feeling heavier than they should. The house was quiet when I opened the door. Too quiet. I walked through the hallway, my footsteps muffled by the rug. Voices drifted from the living room, hers warm and familiar, and a man's low and smooth. My stomach churned as I reached the doorway. There they were, sitting on the couch. Olivia was leaning toward him, her legs tucked beneath her, laughing at something he'd just said. The man, Jonathan, I presumed, was impossibly confident. His arm draped casually over the back of the couch. They didn't notice me at first. It wasn't until I cleared my throat that Olivia turned, her laughter dying instantly. "David," she said, her voice shaky. "You're home early." Jonathan stood, his smile faltering. Hi. You must be David." I didn't respond. My eyes were locked on Olivia, searching her face for an explanation, an excuse, anything that could make sense of this moment. But she had nothing to offer. Jonathan left quickly, muttering something about needing to get to a meeting. Olivia didn't stop him, nor did she try to explain as the door clicked shut behind him. She stood there, staring at me like a deer caught in headlights. Her lips parted as though she wanted to say something, but no words came. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The house, once so warm and familiar, now felt foreign. I glanced at the couch where they'd been sitting, the indentations of their bodies still fresh in the cushions. "Who is he?" I asked finally, my voice colder than I intended. Olivia flinched, and her gaze dropped to the floor. "I told you," she said quietly. "He's a colleague. We've been working together on a big project." "Stop," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "Don't insult me, Olivia. I know what I saw." Her head shot up, her eyes wide with something that looked like panic. "David, it's not what you think. Nothing has happened. I swear." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "Nothing? Late-night calls, secret messages, him sitting in our living room while I'm gone. And you expect me to believe nothing has happened?" "I was going to tell you," she said, her voice trembling. "Tell me what?" I demanded, my anger boiling over. "That you've been sneaking around behind my back? That our kids have been wondering why their mom doesn't have time for them anymore?" Her face crumpled at that, and she covered her mouth with her hand. "David, please." "No," I said, cutting her off. "Not this time. I've been patient, Olivia. I've given you every opportunity to be honest with me, and all I've gotten in return are lies." She started to cry then, her shoulders shaking as she sank into the nearest chair. I wanted to feel something, pity, compassion, maybe even anger, but all I felt was numb. "I need to know the truth," I said after a long pause. "Are you in love with him?" Her sobs quieted, and she looked up at me with tear-streaked cheeks. "No," she whispered. "It's not like that. I don't know what it is. He makes me feel seen." I stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "Seen," I repeated. "What the hell does that even mean? We've built a life together, Olivia. Family. And now you're telling me that wasn't enough for you." She buried her face in her hands, and for the first time in our marriage, I felt an overwhelming distance between us. A chasm so wide that I didn't know if we could ever bridge it. That night, we slept in separate rooms. I lay awake in Theo's bed, his tiny body curled up beside me, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. His steady breathing was a reminder of everything we stood to lose. But Olivia, she was alone in our bedroom, a silent figure behind a closed door. I didn't know what she was thinking, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The next morning, I went through the motions of our usual routine. Breakfast, school drop-offs, a quick goodbye as I headed to work. Olivia barely spoke, her eyes red and puffy. Anna noticed, of course. She watched Olivia carefully during breakfast, her little brow furrowed with worry. "Are you sad, Mommy?" she asked, her voice soft. Olivia smiled weakly, brushing a hand over Anna's hair. "No, sweetheart. Just tired." But Anna wasn't convinced. She glanced at me, her expression questioning, and I felt a pang of guilt. Whatever was happening between Olivia and me, it was spilling over onto our kids. They didn't deserve this. At work, I couldn't focus. My mind kept replaying the scene from the night before. The way Olivia had looked at Jonathan. The way her voice had trembled when she tried to explain herself. I kept telling myself that I needed clarity, closure, something to make sense of the mess my life had become. So, during my lunch break, I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. The decision felt equal parts cowardly and necessary. If Olivia couldn't or wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd find it another way. The investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Claire, assured me she'd be discreet. "Give me a week," she said. "I'll let you know what I find." That week was one of the longest of my life. Olivia tried to pretend everything was normal, but I could see the strain in her every move. She avoided my eyes during dinner, kept her distance during family movie nights, and threw herself into chores as if staying busy could erase the tension between us. The kids felt it too. Anna became quieter, more withdrawn. Theo, sensing the unease but not understanding it, grew clingy, refusing to let Olivia out of his sight. One evening, as I was tucking Anna into bed, she looked up at me with wide, searching eyes. "Daddy, are you and Mommy mad at each other?" she asked. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I forced a smile, brushing her hair back from her forehead.
No, sweetheart.
"Mommy and I are just figuring some things out. Are you going to leave?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I froze. "No," I said firmly, even though I wasn't sure if it was the truth. "We're not going anywhere." She nodded, but her eyes were filled with doubt. The next morning, Claire called. "I have something you need to see," she said, her tone serious. My heart sank. Whatever it was, I knew it wasn't good. I met Claire at a small coffee shop across town, far from where Olivia or anyone we knew might see us. She was already waiting when I arrived, a thin folder resting on the table in front of her. Her expression was neutral but serious, and that told me everything I needed to know. "Mr. Allen," she said as I sat down, gesturing to the folder, "I've gathered enough evidence to confirm your suspicions." My hands felt clammy as I reached for the folder. Inside were photographs and detailed notes. The first image stopped me cold. It was Olivia and Jonathan sitting at an outdoor cafe, leaning close to each other, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The second photo showed them leaving together, their bodies close enough to suggest intimacy. "There's more," Claire said gently. I flipped through the pages. One picture showed Olivia's car parked outside what Claire noted was Jonathan's apartment. Another revealed the two of them walking through a park, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. "It's not just lunches or meetings," Claire continued, her voice low but firm. "There were a few overnight stays. Her car was parked outside his apartment several times, usually while you were at work or away." My stomach twisted. I had prepared myself for this moment, but seeing the evidence laid out so plainly was like a punch to the gut. Did you see anything physical?" I asked, hating myself for even needing to know. Claire hesitated, then nodded. "There's no doubt, Mr. Allen."
I'm sorry.
The world seemed to tilt around me. I stared at the folder, my mind racing. What now? What was I supposed to do with this? "Thank you, Claire," I said eventually, my voice hollow. "I'll let you know if I need anything else." She nodded, her eyes filled with quiet sympathy. The drive home was a blur. My grip on the steering wheel was so tight my knuckles turned white. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly as it always did, warm, inviting, a picture of the life we had built together. But now, it felt like a facade, a beautiful lie masking the betrayal within. Inside, the kids were playing in the living room, their laughter filling the air. Olivia was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She looked up when I walked in, her smile faltering when she saw my face. "David? Is everything okay?" I wanted to yell, to confront her right then and there, but I couldn't do it in front of the kids. They didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire. "Fine," I said curtly, brushing past her. "I'm going to shower." In the bathroom, I locked the door and sank to the floor, the folder still clutched in my hands. My mind replayed the images over and over. The way she looked at Jonathan, the way she laughed with him, the way she betrayed me and the family we had created. By the time I emerged, dinner was on the table. Olivia watched me closely throughout the meal, but I avoided her eyes. Anna chattered on about her day at school, oblivious to the tension thick in the air. That night, after the kids were in bed, I decided it was time. Olivia, I said, standing in the doorway of our bedroom. We need to talk. She looked up from her book, her expression wary. Okay. I closed the door behind me and held up the folder. Claire found everything. Her face went pale. Claire. I hired a private investigator, I said flatly. And she found all the proof I needed. The lunches, the overnight stays, the lies. It's all here, Olivia. She stood, her hands trembling. David, I can explain. Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't insult me with excuses. Just tell me the truth. How long has this been going on? Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Not anymore. For months, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. For months, I repeated, shaking my head. For months of sneaking around, lying to me, and pretending everything was fine. I never meant for it to happen, she said, tears streaming down her face. It just got out of hand. I laughed bitterly. Out of hand? Olivia, this isn't a mistake. This is a choice you made over and over again. You chose him over me, over our family. Her sobs grew louder, but I couldn't stop. The words poured out of me like a flood. Do you know what Anna asked me the other night? She asked if we were mad at each other. She's 6, Olivia, and even she can feel the distance between us. What do I tell her? That her mom is in love with someone else. I'm not in love with him, Olivia cried. I swear, David, I'm not. It was just a distraction. A distraction? I echoed, my voice rising. That's what you call this? Destroying our marriage, tearing apart our family. A distraction? She reached for me, but I stepped back. Don't, I said coldly. Don't touch me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was Olivia's quiet sobs. Finally, I turned to leave. I can't do this right now, I said over my shoulder. We'll talk more tomorrow. I slept in Theo's room again that night, holding him close as if he could anchor me in the storm that was tearing my life apart. The morning after our confrontation, the air in the house felt heavy, like a storm was lingering just outside, waiting to break. Olivia and I avoided each other as much as possible, our movements cautious, almost rehearsed, as we navigated the morning routine for the kids. Anna, perceptive as ever, noticed immediately. Why aren't you and Mommy talking? She asked as I helped her put on her shoes. We're just tired, sweetheart. I lied, forcing a smile. Adults get grumpy sometimes when they don't sleep well. Theo tugged on my pant leg, holding up his stuffed dinosaur. Dino's not grumpy. I laughed, grateful for the brief distraction. Of course not. Dino's always in a good mood. Olivia stood in the doorway, her arms crossed and her face pale. She watched us for a moment before stepping forward. Anna, Theo, let's go. Mommy will take you to school today. The kids brightened at that. It had been weeks since she'd taken the time to drop them off, and they practically bounced out the door. I stayed behind, watching as she strapped them into the car. Her movements were slow, almost hesitant, as if she knew this fragile act of normalcy couldn't last. When the car pulled out of the driveway, I finally exhaled, the weight of the morning sinking into my shoulders. That day at work, I couldn't focus. My mind kept replaying her words from the night before. It was just a distraction, the idea that she could trivialize what she had done, reduce it to something so meaningless, gnawed at me. By the time I returned home that evening, the house was quiet. Olivia was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She looked up when I walked in, her expression a mix of exhaustion and fear. David, she started, but I held up a hand. Not now, I said. I need to eat, and I need to think. She nodded silently, watching as I moved around the kitchen. After dinner, I sat down across from her. The folder from the private investigator sat between us, a tangible reminder of the truth we could no longer ignore. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said, breaking the silence. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. I don't expect you to, but I want to fix this, David. For us, for the kids. The kids, I repeated bitterly. Do you even realize what you've done to them? Anna knows something's wrong. She's 6, Olivia. 6. And Theo might be too young to understand now, but he will. Do you want this to be the example we set for them? Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. I never wanted to hurt them. Or you. I swear. David, I didn't. But you did, I said, my voice sharp. You let this Jonathan into our lives, into our marriage. How am I supposed to come back from that? She didn't answer, and the silence between us stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Over the next few days, we settled into a strange, strained rhythm. Olivia threw herself into being the perfect mother, helping Anna with her homework, taking Theo to the park, cooking elaborate meals for dinner. But it all felt hollow, like she was trying to cover up the cracks with a fresh coat of paint. I couldn't bring myself to reciprocate. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was the betrayal, the lies, and the nights she had spent with him. One night, as I was tucking Anna into bed, she looked up at me with wide, solemn eyes. "Daddy," she said softly, "are you and Mommy going to get a divorce?" The question hit me like a freight train. "Why would you ask that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She shrugged, her small fingers fiddling with the edge of her blanket. "You don't talk to each other anymore, and you're always sad." I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "Mommy and I are just trying to figure some things out. But no matter what happens, we'll always love you and Theo. Okay?" She nodded, but the doubt in her eyes lingered. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in Theo's bed, listening to the faint creak of the floorboards as Olivia moved around the house. The distance between us felt insurmountable, and for the first time, I wondered if there was any point in trying to repair what had been broken. The next morning, I made a decision. "Olivia," I said, catching her as she was pouring cereal for the kids, "we need to go to counseling." She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. "Counseling? For the kids?" I added quickly. "If we're going to make this work, or even if we don't, they need stability. They need to know we're trying." Her shoulders slumped, and she nodded. "Okay, I'll call someone today." But even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure if I believed them. Part of me knew that the damage had already been done, and that no amount of therapy could erase the scars we were leaving on each other, and on our children. The first counseling session was awkward, to say the least. Olivia and I sat side by side on a small, stiff couch in a sunlit office that felt far too warm. Across from us, Dr. Hayes, a soft-spoken woman in her late 50s, sat with a notebook balanced on her knee, her pen poised to capture our pain. "Why don't we start with what brought you both here today?" she asked, her tone gentle. Neither of us spoke at first. The silence stretched on until Olivia finally cleared her throat. I made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "I hurt David, and now we're trying to figure out how to move forward." Dr. Hayes nodded, her expression neutral. "David, how does that make you feel?" I almost laughed at the simplicity of the question. How did it make me feel? Angry, betrayed, hollow. But I knew the point of these sessions wasn't to lash out, so I forced myself to stay calm. "It makes me feel like I don't know her anymore," I said quietly. "Like the person I married doesn't exist." Olivia flinched at my words, her hands twisting in her lap. "That's not true," she said, looking at me for the first time in what felt like weeks. "I'm still me, David. I got lost for a while." "Lost?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "You didn't get lost, Olivia. You made choices. You chose him." Dr. Hayes held up a hand, her voice calm but firm. "Let's take a step back. Olivia, when you say you got lost, what do you mean?" Olivia hesitated, tears brimming in her eyes. "I mean, I felt invisible. David works so much, and the kids take up so much of my time. Somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like a person. Jonathan, he noticed me. He made me feel seen." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "So what?" I snapped. "I wasn't enough for you? Our family wasn't enough." "It's not about being enough," she said, her voice breaking. "It's about feeling like I mattered. like someone actually saw me as more than just a wife and a mom. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to yell. I've always seen you, Olivia. I've always loved you. But you let him into our lives anyway. Dr. Hayes interjected before things could escalate further. David, it sounds like you feel betrayed not just by Olivia's actions, but by the idea that your efforts weren't recognized. Is that fair to say? I nodded, my jaw tight. And Olivia? She continued, turning to her. It sounds like you were seeking validation, something you felt was missing at home. Is that accurate? Olivia nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Yes, but it doesn't excuse what I did. I know that. The session ended with no clear resolution, just a mess of raw emotions laid bare between us. The kids didn't know about the counseling. We told them we were going out to talk about grown-up things, and they didn't ask too many questions. But Anna, ever perceptive, seemed to sense that something was wrong. One evening, as I was helping her with her homework, she looked up at me and said, "Do you still love Mommy?" The question caught me off guard. "Of course I do," I said automatically. "Then why don't you look happy anymore?" I didn't know how to answer that. The second session was just as tense as the first. Dr. Hayes asked us to dig deeper, to confront the feelings we were avoiding. "Olivia," she said, "have you ended your relationship with Jonathan?" "Yes," Olivia said quickly, her voice firm. "I haven't seen or spoken to him since David found out." "Do you still think about him?" Olivia hesitated, and my stomach twisted as I waited for her answer. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not because I miss him. I think about how much damage I caused, how stupid I was to let it happen. And you, David," Dr. Hayes said, turning to me, "what do you need from Olivia to start rebuilding trust?" The question stopped me cold. What did I need? An apology wasn't enough. Promises didn't mean anything. What I wanted was to turn back time to undo the past. But that wasn't possible. "I need honesty," I said finally. "And I need to know that she's willing to fight for this family. For us." "I am," Olivia said, her voice trembling. "I'll do whatever it takes, David. I swear." For weeks we went through the motions. Counseling, careful conversations, strained attempts at normalcy. But no matter how hard we tried, the shadow of what had happened loomed over us. One night, as we sat on the couch after putting the kids to bed, Olivia turned to me, her eyes filled with a desperation I hadn't seen before. "David," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you think we can ever go back to the way things were?" I stared at her, the weight of her question pressing down on me. "I don't know," I admitted. "I want to, but it feels like every time I look at you, I see him. I see what you did, and I don't know if that will ever go away." Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. "I hate myself for what I did," she said through her tears. "I hate that I hurt you. I hate that I risked everything we built together. But I love you, David. I love you more than anything." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to take her in my arms and tell her that we'd get through this. But all I could do was sit there, the weight of her words and my own doubt suffocating me. Weeks turned into a month, and counseling became a routine. Each session was a mix of progress and pain, with truths emerging that neither of us wanted to face. Dr. Hayes often asked questions that lingered long after we left her office, questions that kept me awake at night. One such session started with a deceptively simple question. "David, what scares you most about trying to repair this marriage?" I hesitated, my throat tightening. "That it won't work," I said finally. "That no matter how hard we try, I'll never trust her again. And if I can't trust her, how can we ever be happy?" Olivia flinched but didn't look away. "I'm scared too," she admitted. "I'm scared that you'll never forgive me, that I've broken us beyond repair." Her words hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. Dr. Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "Fear is natural in situations like this," she said. "But the question is, what are you willing to do with that fear? Will you let it control you, or will you use it to move forward?" I didn't have an answer then. I wasn't sure if I ever would. At home, the tension was palpable. Olivia tried harder than ever to prove herself. Planning family outings, cooking elaborate meals, making an effort to be more present with the kids. But her efforts felt performative, like she was trying to patch a sinking ship with duct tape. The kids, blissfully unaware of the full extent of our troubles, soaked up the attention. Anna beamed when Olivia surprised her with a trip to the zoo, and Theo giggled endlessly as Olivia chased him around the backyard. Watching them, I felt a pang of longing for the life we used to have, a life that now seemed so far out of reach. But the cracks were still there, just beneath the surface. One night, after the kids were in bed, I found myself staring at the wedding photo hanging in the hallway. Olivia and I looked so young, so happy, so sure of our future. Felt like a cruel joke now. David! Her voice pulled me from my thoughts. She was standing a few feet away, her expression hesitant. I miss us, she said softly. I miss the way we used to be. So do I said, my voice heavy. But I don't know if we can get that back. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. Instead, she reached for my hand, her touch tentative. For a moment I considered pulling away, but I didn't. The breakthrough, or perhaps the breaking point, came during a particularly intense counseling session. Dr. Hayes had asked Olivia to write a letter to me, one that explained her actions and expressed her feelings in a way that she struggled to verbalize. Olivia handed me the letter with trembling hands, her eyes avoiding mine. I unfolded the paper, my heart pounding as I began to read. David, I don't know where to begin, because I don't know if there's anything I can say that will make you understand why I did what I did. But I need you to know that it was never about not loving you. I've always loved you. You're my best friend, my partner, the father of my children. You've given me so much, and I hate myself for throwing it all away. I didn't plan for it to happen. Jonathan came into my life at a time when I was struggling in ways I didn't even realize. I felt invisible, like I was drowning in the routine of our lives. He noticed me in a way that made me feel alive, but it wasn't real. It was an illusion, and I see that now. He didn't love me, not the way you do. Not the way I love you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope you can. For the kids, for us, for the life we built together. I'll spend the rest of my life making this right, if you'll let me. Olivia. By the time I finished reading, my hands were shaking. I folded the letter carefully and set it on the table, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Do you mean it? I asked, my voice hoarse. Every word, she said, tears streaming down her face. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to grab onto the hope her words offered and let it pull me out of the darkness. But a part of me still held back, unwilling to risk being hurt again. In the days that followed, I found myself replaying her words over and over. Slowly, I began to let her back in, small steps that felt monumental. I agreed to let her plan a family outing, a trip to the beach that Anna and Theo had been begging for. Watching Olivia play in the waves with the kids, her laughter ringing out across the sand, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in months. It wasn't quite forgiveness, but it was the beginning of something close to it. That night, as we tucked the kids into bed, Olivia turned to me, her expression hopeful. Thank you, she said. For what? For giving me another chance. I didn't respond right away, but as I lay awake that night, listening to the quiet hum of the house, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we weren't as broken as I thought. The trip to the beach felt like a tentative step toward normalcy, but the weight of what had happened still hung over us. As much as I wanted to move forward, every laugh Olivia shared with the kids, every warm smile she offered me, felt tainted. I found myself questioning her sincerity, wondering if the woman who had lied to me for months could truly change. The counseling sessions continued, each one peeling back another layer of our fractured relationship. Dr. Hayes urged us to focus on rebuilding trust, to practice open communication and honesty, no matter how difficult. But trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. One evening, as we sat on the couch after the kids had gone to bed, Olivia reached for my hand. I know I can't undo what I've done, she said softly, but I need you to know that I'm trying, David. I'm trying to be the person you deserve. Her words were earnest, but they only reminded me of how far we had to go. It's not just about trying, Olivia, I said, pulling my hand away. It's about proving that I can trust you again. And right now, I don't know if I can. She nodded, her expression pained. I understand, but I won't stop trying. The kids were the glue that held us together during those difficult weeks. Their laughter, their innocent questions, their unshakable belief that their parents loved them unconditionally. It all forced us to keep moving forward, even when it felt impossible. One night, as I was reading Theo a bedtime story, Anna appeared in the doorway, her face serious. "Can I talk to you, Daddy?" she asked. I nodded, tucking Theo in before following her to her room. She climbed onto her bed and hugged her stuffed unicorn tightly, her wide eyes searching mine. "Are you and Mommy okay now?" she asked. The question caught me off guard, as it always did. "We're trying, sweetheart," I said carefully. "But you still look sad sometimes," she said, her voice small. "Did Mommy do something bad?" My chest tightened, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I didn't want to lie to her, but I also didn't want to burden her with the truth. "Mommy and I have had a hard time lately," I said finally. "But we both love you and Theo more than anything, and we're doing everything we can to make sure we stay a family." Anna studied me for a moment, her young face full of wisdom beyond her years. "I hope you do," she said simply. The following week, Olivia approached me with an idea. "There's this couples retreat," she said, holding up a flyer. "Dr. Hayes recommended it. It's supposed to help rebuild trust and communication." I stared at the flyer, the colorful images of smiling couples looking painfully out of place in our situation. "Do you really think that'll help?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'm willing to try. Are you?" Her question hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken doubt. Finally, I nodded. "Okay, let's do it." The retreat was held at a secluded cabin in the woods, far from the noise and distractions of everyday life. It was just us and 3 other couples, all of whom carried their own stories of heartbreak and hope. The exercises were simple but effective. One involved sitting face to face and listing things we appreciated about each other. "I appreciate how much you love the kids," Olivia said, her voice trembling. "I appreciate how hard you work to take care of us, even when things are hard." "I appreciate your strength," I said after a long pause, "and the way you always make the kids feel loved, even when I don't feel it myself." The honesty in our words felt raw, almost painful. But for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in so long: hope. The retreat wasn't a magic fix, but it gave us tools to keep working on our relationship. Back home, we started carving out time for each other, setting aside distractions to focus on rebuilding what we had lost. But progress wasn't linear. There were nights when I'd catch her glancing at her phone, and my heart would seize with fear. There were moments when she'd reach for me, and I'd hesitate, the memory of her betrayal still too fresh. One such moment came on a quiet Friday evening. The kids were asleep, and we were sitting on the couch, a bottle of wine between us. Olivia leaned toward me, her hand brushing mine. "I miss you," she said softly. I looked at her, my emotions a tangled mess. "I miss us too," I admitted. "But I don't know if we'll ever be the same." "We might not be," she said. "But maybe we can be something better." Her words stayed with me long after she had fallen asleep. Was it possible to rebuild something new from the wreckage of what we had lost? Or were we doomed to keep circling the same pain forever? That night, as I lay awake, I found myself thinking not of the betrayal but of the love we had once shared. The laughter, the dreams, the promises. And I realized that, despite everything, a part of me still wanted to fight for us. The fragile sense of progress Olivia and I had built over the past few months was tested in ways I hadn't anticipated. Trust, it seemed, was not something that could simply be earned back through kind words and promises. It was a living thing, fragile, temperamental, prone to shatter under the slightest pressure. The real test came on a quiet Tuesday evening. I had come home early from work, hoping to spend some extra time with the kids. Anna and Theo were in the living room, building an elaborate blanket fort. Olivia was in the kitchen, her phone in her hand as she leaned against the counter. "Hey," I said, walking in. She jumped slightly, quickly sliding the phone into her pocket. It was such a small thing, so minor that I might not have noticed it months ago. But now, every movement, every glance, every moment of hesitation felt loaded with meaning. "Who was that?" I asked, my voice steady but firm. She hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the pocket where her phone rested. "Just a work thing," she said, forcing a smile. It was the same excuse she had given me so many times before, the same lie that had unraveled our lives. "Let me see," I said, holding out my hand. Her eyes widened. "David, come on. You don't need to do this." "Let me see," I repeated, my voice harder this time. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, with a sigh, she pulled the phone from her pocket and handed it to me. I scrolled through her messages, my heart pounding. Most of them were harmless chats with coworkers, updates from the kids' school. But then I saw it. A message thread with a name that made my blood run cold. Jonathan. I opened the thread, my hands trembling. The messages weren't overtly romantic, but they were far too familiar for my comfort. "Hey, just wanted to check in. Hope you're doing okay. Miss our talks. Let me know if you ever need someone to talk to." The most recent message was from Olivia. "Thanks, but I'm trying to focus on my family now." I looked up at her, my chest tight. "You're still talking to him?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "That message was weeks ago. I haven't responded to him since." "But he's still reaching out," I said, my voice rising. "He's still in your life, Olivia. How am I supposed to believe you're committed to fixing this when he's still there?" "I didn't encourage him," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I told him it was over. I told him I was focusing on us." "But you didn't block him," I said, my anger boiling over. "You left the door open, Olivia. Do you have any idea what that does to me? To know that he still has access to you." She started to cry, her hands shaking as she reached for me. "David, please. I don't want him. I don't even think about him anymore. He's nothing to me." "Then prove it," I said, thrusting the phone back into her hands. "Block him. Right now." She hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Taking a deep breath, she opened the message thread and hit the block button. "There," she said, holding the phone up for me to see. "He's gone." But it didn't feel like enough. The damage had already been done, and no amount of blocked numbers could erase the pain of seeing his name on her phone. That night, after the kids were asleep, Olivia and I sat in the living room in silence. She stared at her hands, her face pale and drawn, while I wrestled with the storm of emotions inside me. "I don't know if I can do this," I said finally, my voice breaking. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear. "David, please, don't say that." "I'm trying, Olivia," I said, my hands clenched into fists. "But every time I feel like we're making progress, something like this happens, and it's like I'm right back where I started." "It was a mistake," she said desperately. "I should have blocked him sooner. I should have told you. But I swear to you, I'm not hiding anything anymore. I want this to work. I want us to work." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that blocking his number was the beginning of a new chapter, not just another false start. But the doubts wouldn't leave me. "I don't know if love is enough," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She reached for my hand, her touch tentative. "It can be," she said, "if we let it." In the days that followed, I found myself caught in a constant tug-of-war between hope and despair. I could see Olivia trying, pouring every ounce of herself into our family, into our marriage. And yet, the memory of Jonathan's presence lingered like a ghost, refusing to be banished. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the kids play in the yard, Olivia turned to me. "Do you think we'll ever be happy again?" she asked, her voice quiet. I looked at her, at the woman I had loved for so many years, and felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Faith. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I think we owe it to the kids and to ourselves to try." She smiled through her tears, and for the first time in months, I felt like we might actually have a chance. The day after our porch conversation, I woke up feeling different, lighter, somehow. For months, my life had been consumed by doubt and anger, but now there was a glimmer of something else. Hope. Olivia noticed the change too. She didn't say anything, but the way she looked at me that morning, soft, cautious, like she didn't want to shatter whatever fragile truce we had reached, told me she felt it too. For the first time in weeks, we worked as a team. She made breakfast while I got the kids ready for school. Anna was her usual chatty self, talking about an art project she was excited to show us, while Theo asked me to tie his shoes 3 separate times because he kept pulling the laces loose. "Daddy, will you and Mommy come to my art show tomorrow?" Anna asked as she put her shoes on. "Of course we will," I said without hesitation, glancing at Olivia. She nodded, her smile faint but genuine. We wouldn't miss it for the world. Later that day, I found myself thinking about the life we had built together, the good, the bad, and everything in between. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And despite everything, I realized I still wanted to fight for it. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I sat down with Olivia. She was in the living room, scrolling through a parenting blog on her laptop. When she saw me, she closed the laptop and turned to face me, her expression wary. "What's on your mind?" she asked. "I've been thinking," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully, "about us, about what we've been through." She stayed quiet, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I don't want to give up," I continued. "I don't know if we can ever go back to the way things were, but maybe we can find something new, something better." Her eyes filled with tears, and she reached for my hand. "David, I've been praying for this, for us to find a way back to each other. I know it's going to take time, and I know I have so much to make up for, but I promise you, I'll never stop trying." I nodded, squeezing her hand. "We'll take it one day at a time, for the kids and for us." The next day, we attended Anna's art show as a family. She beamed when she saw us walking in together, holding hands. Her painting, a vibrant depiction of our family standing under a rainbow, was displayed prominently on the wall. "That's us," she said proudly, pointing at the figures. "See? There's Daddy, Mommy, me, and Theo." I stared at the painting, my throat tightening. It was simple, imperfect, but filled with love, just like us. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into a hug. Olivia stood beside me, her hand resting lightly on my arm. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. The weeks that followed weren't easy, but they were different. Olivia and I committed to regular date nights, carving out time to reconnect without the distractions of work or parenting. We learned to talk again, to listen, to be honest even when it hurt. The kids noticed the change too. Anna stopped asking if we were mad at each other, and Theo started sleeping through the night again. Slowly, the tension that had filled our home began to fade. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Olivia turned to me. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For giving us another chance. For not giving up on me." I looked at her, the woman I had loved for so many years, and saw not the mistakes she had made but the strength it took for her to own them. "We're a team," I said, "and teams don't quit." She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. We weren't perfect. There were still moments of doubt, still nights when the past loomed too large to ignore. But we faced it together, one step at a time. And slowly we began to build something new, something stronger, something real. In the end, love wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing each other every single day. And for the first time in a long time, I knew we would be okay.